And we are live, December 14th edition of the MMA Industry Podcast. I am, of course, James Lynch. And if you haven't seen this podcast before, basically we talk to people who are in the mixed martial arts industry, speak to a lot of journalists. And I've got a great one here for us today, Hunter Homistek. He is a mixed martial arts journalist and also a marketing coordinator for FloSports. Hunter, what's going on? How are you?
Man, it's amazing. A ton of snow here in Pittsburgh, which I'm sure you can relate to being in Canada. I mean, that's year-round there, right? So the snow sucks, but it's always nice being interviewed by you, man. The best in the business at this. It's an honor.
And I appreciate that. And of course, I got a full disclosure here. Hunter and I work together over at FloCombat, and we've been friends for a couple of years now. And the way I always like starting this podcast is kind of telling our listeners how my guest and I met. And you and I have met a couple times in person, but do you remember the first time we met, like in person? Do you remember this? You're probably gonna draw a blank.
On the spot already. I don't think I do, man. I don't know.
Okay, UFC 205 in New York.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I remember that. I thought we were stretching back further, and there was a random like UFC.
No. This is no. That was the only event, and I remember seeing you because that was if you remember the open workouts for that was on a Wednesday. We're at Madison Square Garden, and everyone was like shooting hoops and stuff, and there was a huge media turnout because obviously it was Conor McGregor, and I just remember like seeing you in the crowd because for those who don't know, Hunter's like 7'2", like he's crazy tall, so he's very easy to spot. And I remember right away I was like, hey, what's up? And we've known each other for years, but it was cool to like finally get to meet you. And so that's sort of where Hunter and I first sort of met. And let's start right back at the beginning here, Hunter. As far as your foray into combat sports, where did it start for you? Were you like into pro wrestling? Were you into MMA from the beginning? Like what sort of got you into the sport initially?
Yeah, no, man. I know a lot of people do start with pro wrestling. It's funny. I never liked it. Like even as a kid, I was never into pro wrestling. I'm still not at all. I'll know names here and there, obviously, the huge stars. So it's like I have friends that are super into it. So when they say somebody and I recognize his name, I'm like, oh, that's a big deal. Like if I know that guy, this one must really matter. But for MMA, it was actually my cousin. He's about 13 years older than me. I want to say my cousin, his name's Blaney, and he used to always get the UFC pay-per-views, and we would just go to his house and watch them with him. He was just a bachelor at the time, out of college into the work life, and just on Saturdays he would get UFC pay-per-views, and it was always a fun little family thing to go there and watch some fights with him. And I got in late. Like I know a lot of people are pride never die, and in it all early. For me, man, it was like Chuck and Tito were full-fledged in their feud, and it was like Randy Couture, Tim Sylvia was one of the first fights that I really remember. So it was that era, UF 60-ish, I would say. Okay. Right around then I got into it. So I wasn't even, the Ultimate Fighter 1. I was after that. I feel like it was tough 3, 4, 5-ish when I got into it. So kind of late, man, but it's an easy sport to fall in love with, right? You see a couple moments like Randy Couture, Tim Sylvia, that opening right hand, and you're like, this is for me. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I didn't get into the sport that much, later than you did, or that much earlier than you did, I should say, because I remember the first pay-per-view I watched was Rich Franklin and Nate Corey, and that wasn't that far off that card because I want to say that was UFC 56 or something. It was close, but mind you, that was also when the UFC was doing like a pay-per-view every like couple months, so it was a little bit more spaced out, not like now where you get events like every weekend or whatever. But where was, because I know you were doing like theater in high school. I know you did like you're big into music and stuff. Where did you actually start writing about the sport? Where did that sort of come from? And do you remember the first thing you ever wrote?
I do, actually, man. This is funny. It started in college. The writing about it actually started in college. So just to trace it back a little further, I was in out of high school. I actually went to college. I went the pre-med route. I was going to go to medical school to be a brain surgeon. Like that's a part of things that I don't know if that's ever been told like on air, that part about me. But yeah, I was actually going to go to med school. My sister's in med school. She's a doctor now. So it was kind of a logical progression for me out of high school, not really knowing what the hell I wanted to do. You had some good SAT scores, some good offers. You're like, hey, you might as well go for broke and be a brain surgeon because that makes a lot of sense. But, 3 years into that program, I was doing fine, academically wise, doing fine, just realizing that, hey, man, like, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? I don't think, like, I'm not passionate about this. I don't wake up every day like, oh, I can't wait to learn some more biochemistry today. It's like, it just wasn't for me. But the whole time I was also writing on the side, but writing music reviews and reviewing CDs, writing about music, kind of keeping my toes in that music scene that you kind of alluded to. And I was like, man, why don't I just like try writing for the school's newspaper? So I got in with the WVU's newspaper, West Virginia University's newspaper, started writing for them, covering some local events and things like that. And I was just like, man, like journalism, like I'm actually passionate about this. I get excited to go to these events and talk to these people. And it's a huge 180, right, for everybody, for my family, for my girlfriend and her family. That's how, you know, they think she's maybe marrying into a brain surgeon, but now he's going to be a writer. Like, oh man, there's no stability there. So it was a big decision, but ultimately it was one that I felt I needed to make, and it's made all the difference. So yeah, just as far as writing about MMA though, in the journalism department, there was a course that was essentially a blogging course. This is probably 2012. So it was like teaching you how to blog basically effectively. And the first day you had to make a blog, you know, you had to pick a theme and a topic for your blog. And I was just like, MMA, let's do it. Like, I like this. I feel like I could write about it. Let's just try it. And then that was that, man. And the first article was just some UFC preview, you know, an event preview. And the teacher was immediately like, hey, on the blog, we don't really want national topics. We want like hyper local topics. So then it became me like getting invested in the regional West Virginia MMA scene, which was just starting then, like just barely off the ground. So that was actually really fun, getting to know the gym managers and all the local fighters and stuff like that, which it has come full circle at FloCombat, right? That's funny that the regional scene kind of started it. Now we're back in the regional scene. But yeah, man, that was where it all began.
That's interesting. Now, as far as you getting on with Bleacher Report, how did that sort of start as close to you getting on with them?
Yeah, it was just a site that I read all the time back then. You know, I would always go to Bleacher Report because I loved the lists. I know that people hated their slideshows back in the day and thought it was cheap clicks and everything, but the lists were something that really drew me to them. I've been a sucker for lists my whole life, man. It's actually funny that I started with Bleacher Report because my mom will always tell this story. Like, the worst gift she ever got me was a typewriter. Because when I was like 7 years old, she got me a typewriter, and I would all day just make lists. I would rank things like my top 10 favorite cars, my top 10 favorite whatever. I was real into hockey back then, NHL players all day, you know, typing in. And the typewriter, of course, click, 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 click. And you're slow, you know, you're 7 years old. You're not typing fast. So it's like this monotonous clicking. And she was like, that clicking sound used to drive me crazy. But it was funny because, you know, the lists. And then I would gravitate towards Bleacher Report doing the list. So one day I was just on Bleacher Report and I noticed a little like ad on the side that said, want to join our team, you know, apply here. And that was it, man. I just clicked it. I submitted like 2 of my blog posts because that was all I had written at the time. Yeah. And they're like, hey, it seems like you know grammar and you've got somewhat of a grasp on writing, you know, we'll give you a shot. And it started as just, you know, very low on the totem pole Bleacher Report, very low level stuff. But the first day that I was officially a part of Bleacher Report and had my profile and stuff, they would rank the writers too on the side. There would be like a featured columnist section and you could see like lead writers. So I knew who their lead guys were. So the first day I was there, I messaged all of them. And I was just like, hey man, like anything I can do to help you out, I'll transcribe, I'll do this, I'll do the written work, any projects, let me in on that. And then, you know, a couple of them came through and from there they were like, hey, this kid, you know, cares more than the average kid, it seems like. And then they fast tracked me in this. It was called like the featured columnist program or something like that. So they like kind of fast tracked me to get me a part of that team. And I just did what they asked and worked hard. And then that worked out.
Now, just for clarification, I'm sure you can talk about this now. Was this a paid gig back then, or were you sort of just, because I know sometimes Bleacher has people, you know, come on board that sort of write for free. When did that sort of take place when you're actually, you know, making a bit of money off of it?
Yeah, it did. It started for free. You know, at first I wasn't making anything. I was just trying to get my name out there, get some clips on my resume. And that was fine with me. You know, I didn't even want money at the time. Well, it's not that I didn't want money. I didn't expect money or need money. But after I became a part of that featured columnist program, then some money came into play. And Bleacher Report would kind of do a thing where on event nights, they would kick out their specialty articles where I'm sure you've seen a few like real winners and losers, like grades, like things like that. And you would get, you know, X amount of dollars if you would take one of those. So it was like a volunteer kind of program. Like you want that extra money every month. Okay, well then sign up to get these articles. So I really like that. You know, that kind of stuff. Those little incentives, side incentives, always worked well for me. So that was cool, man. That just pushed me harder. And so yeah, Bleacher Report was not paid at first, but then was paid and paid pretty decently, actually.
Yeah, and it's important to sort of note that, just with the fact that you know, I've written for free like numerous times, and I think when you're starting out, you should have that mentality that, you know, you want to, you know, you got to work on your skills. You know, you're not going to get a paid gig right out of the gate, so it's important to, you know, do like a small commitment and then sort of work your way up and get sort of you know, get your name sort of recognized and hone your skills. And I think that's you know, people might hear you say, oh, you know, you didn't get paid off the bat, but that's how it is. That's how it is for a lot of people. You're not going to get, you know, completely paid out of the gate. So it's important to sort of you know, learn that early on as sort of one of those things to just keep in the back of your head. Now, when you got hired at Bleacher Report, was Brian Oswald the one who hired you? Who was the staff at the time, and who were some of the writers on the site?
Oswald was definitely the editor. I don't know if he directly hired me, because there was, like I said, that featured columnist program kind of had a different guy running that particular program. So I know that, I forget that guy's name. That's kind of sad. He was involved. He was involved as well. But Oswald was the editor. Dwayne Finley was there, one of the lead writers, which again is a full circle kind of deal. Jeremy Botter was there. Matt Roth was there. Jonathan Snowden was there. Those were kind of the top guys. And then Scott Harris. There was a guy, Andrew Lawrence, who at the time was like really killing it for that. Like he was one of the top guys. Or Andrew Saunders.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say Andrew Lawrence is the
Middle Easy. See, I'm talking to Middle Easy guys too much now, and now yeah, Lawrence is popping up in conversations all the time now. Yeah, sorry, Andrew Saunders. Sorry. He was there. Craig Amos may have been there. Matt Ryder, Nathan McCarter, Steven Rondina. A lot of guys that are still there actually were there at the time when I got on. So really good team. I still think Bleacher Report has one of the best MMA teams in the business, man. They've always done a good job getting the right talent.
Talk about, you know, you and Dwayne sort of, you know, developing this friendship, because it's crazy. Like, you know, it started there. And I remember actually seeing you. I remember when Dwayne was first doing the road trip, I believe you joined him on the second leg or something like that. Because I remember Dwayne started doing some videos when he was at Bleacher, and I remember you being in one of them. Where, you know, how did you and Dwayne sort of click, and you know, maybe just kind of give a bit of, you know, kind of background on the road trip and how that sort of came together?
Yeah, man, that was funny. And to this day, I kind of asked my parents, like, why the hell did you let me do this? Like, why would you ever agree to this? But Dwayne, I honestly, the first time I ever met him, period, was when he picked me up to go on the road trip. Like, I literally went in blind. I maybe exchanged a few emails, tweets, whatever, like internal Bleacher Report things. I was aware of him, but I certainly didn't know him by any means, you know? And he just hit me up. He was like, hey, man, the road trip. Obviously, you know, I was following the first leg of the road trip, too, being on Bleacher Report and everything. So I knew what was happening. But then he was like, hey, I'll be swinging right through Pittsburgh if you want me to pick you up. Like, let's do it. And I'm not one to say no to opportunities, man. Like, that's kind of a theme throughout this whole thing. When there's something there, I'll just say, yes, I'll try it. And sometimes it works out like this, man. That first road trip definitely changed everything, not just in getting my name out there, but the friendship with Dwayne, and then also showing me a different side to the MMA media game, you know, the way that you can interact with fighters and be friendly with them and not worry about the traditional journalism construct, so to speak. A lot of that was just fundamental in my learning early on. So I think that was 2013, the fall of 2013. So I'd been working for Bleacher Report almost 2 years at that point. And yeah, man, that definitely changed it all from there. As they say, you know, it's kind of written from there. Dwayne and I have been pretty much inseparable since then.
Yeah, it's true. You guys are like the dynamic duo, and it's cool to see that, you know, MMA is, you know, this industry has sort of brought you guys together. And I didn't know that you just met him on the road trip. That's very cool. Kind of taking a step back from that. Do you remember the first interview you ever did? The first fighter you spoke to that you did an interview with?
Yeah, I know who I think it was, at least. I'll put it that way. Like, I'm not sure if this was actually the first one, but it was at a local West Virginia event, and this is funny. It's funny that it's a name that people might actually recognize, too. It was Josh Stansberry.
Oh, wow. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, he was fighting just on that local West Virginia show, and just randomly on the card. And I'll be totally honest, I mean, I really didn't know who he was at the time. I got the fight card and was just looking at the names. I was like, hey, this guy won with a nice guillotine. I'll go talk to him. You know, I didn't realize he was going to end up being one of the top guys from the region and stuff. It was actually him, Joey Holt, who is a boxer, and he's dabbled in MMA. Actually fought Julian Lane in MMA. So he's much better at boxing. Like, his box career is really good in Ohio, Joey Holt. And Hector Urbina also was one of the very first ones on one of those West Virginia cards. So it was funny to have some national talent there that I didn't even know. those videos are still probably on YouTube lingering around somewhere, me
Nice.
holding a flip camera in their face backstage. So yeah, man, those were the first few. And honestly, they're like 35 seconds long, I want to say. Like, I didn't know, you can tell I didn't really know what to say or how to do it. I got like 3 questions. I was like, all right, cool, good job, see ya. You know, it was one of those deals. But as you know, man, fundamental, just getting your feet wet, going through the paces a little bit.
Yeah, getting those reps in, as they say. Do you remember which promotion that was that you covered the event for off the top of your head? You said it was in West Virginia, right?
Yeah, so NAAFS was doing some then, but it was also the Simons. It was called Simons Promotions, and they were called Cage Power and Cage Fury, I want to say.
Okay.
They had like 2 different. So Simons Promotions, though, was the person running the show, man. They're surprisingly awesome shows back then. Adam Milstead also met him through NAAFS, so that in West Virginia. So it's kind of funny now seeing everybody that was on those cards. Like, holy shit, I was actually in something pretty cool.
Yeah, it sort of all came together. Now, as far as, you know, working at Bleacher Report and, you know, doing this, what were you doing? Like, were you still in school at the time? Were you working a job? What were you doing sort of on the side along with Bleacher Report? Because I imagine this wasn't like a full-time gig at the time.
Yeah, man, I was still in college for a solid part of the Bleacher Report experience. I graduated in December 2013, so actually right after that first Bleacher Report road trip, I graduated. And but throughout college, I worked for Bleacher Report. I worked for the school's newspaper. I was the arts and entertainment editor there. And then I also worked for a company called Idea House, which was online marketing, branding. They called it creative communications as like a catch-all, because they did a little PR, a little branding, a little marketing, little social media. So they would just get clients in all fields. You know, they kind of leaned health and wellness. Doctors, kind of like Dr. Phil types, like doctors that wanted to be Dr. Phil types, so where the brand was very important and social media presence very important. So we would kind of spearhead their communications. And that was cool, man. Like, that now at Flo has helped me immensely, that background in that. So I was doing the marketing and communications with them, doing MMA with Bleacher Report, and then doing the traditional kind of print journalism with the school's newspaper.
Now, we'll get to the part 2 of your career, because we talked about part 1, which was Bleacher Report. There is the part 2, and then we'll get to the FloSports stuff. But what happened at Bleacher Report when they went through some changes? I know Dwayne was let go, and, you know, they brought in Patrick Wyman. They brought in, you know, I think Sidney Jones. They brought in some different writers. How were you sort of affected by that with the changes? Because I know you ended up at MMA Fighting shortly after that.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, man. Exactly like you described it. They brought in Patrick Wyman, Sidney Jones, and maybe Chiappetta as well shortly after.
Yeah.
But when they did that, they just had to clear space. I mean, that's how it goes, right? And I honestly, man, I hold zero resentment towards Oswald on that. We still talk to Oswald almost every day. You know, I love that guy, and he's helped me a ton. And like you said, he actually helped me land back on my feet, because when he let me go, I was like, hey, man, like, obviously I disagree. You know, I'm unhappy with it. I feel like I should stay, that you shouldn't cut me, but can you at least give me the names of like Dan Stupp, or, you know, the email addresses, contact info, Dan Stupp, Brian Tucker, like give me some of the other guys so I can go somewhere else at least. Because it was funny, man. At first I thought that I was just going to be done, go focus on the Idea House stuff and maybe work a different angle. And Dwayne kind of called me back in. He's like, dude, don't stop yet. Like, you can't. He kind of gave me the pep talk, you know.
As he usually does, yeah.
Yeah, as Bo does with his pep talks. So one of the names that Brian Oswald gave me was Brian Tucker's, and I hit him up immediately. And as luck had it, they were hiring two positions, and it was myself and Danny Segura that they called on right after that. It was maybe a month, or maybe not even a month out of it, you know. So there was really no downtime between Bleacher Report and MMA Fighting, but obviously MMA Fighting was the all-star team. That was like getting called up to the Pittsburgh Penguins, the best hockey team.
I love the reference. Hockey references are always encouraged on here.
Yeah, like there you go. So it's like it was like joining Sid Crosby and Malkin and all those guys. So it was awesome, man.
Okay, interesting. Now, I actually remember when you got hired, because believe it or not, I was on my honeymoon with my wife, and I remember I was still trying to keep track of what was going on, and I remember seeing that you got hired, and I was like, oh, that's good, because I had followed your work at Bleacher Report, and you know, you ended up getting on the site with Danny, like you mentioned. Now, as this is all going on, so, you know, take me back to, like, how did you find out that you got let go from Bleacher, and then how did you find out you'd been hired by Fighting? Like, how did that, was that like a phone call, an email? How did that sort of happen on both ends?
Yeah, I actually found out on social media, like UFC. No, I'm kidding. Like UFC fighters always find out. Oh, I didn't know you were tweeting about it, but no, man. So Oswald just called me, but Dwayne actually got fired. I don't remember how long before me, maybe a couple days before me. So when he told me he got let go, I kind of knew like the writing was on the wall, so to speak, that changes are coming, and my style is super similar to his. Obviously, the kind of work that I brought to the table for Bleacher Report was very similar. So I had a feeling, and plus, kind of a funny aside here, I was coming off a vacation in Florida right when this happened. So all vacation, like the month of June, May, June, whatever month it happened to be, I had like zero output for Bleacher Report. Like I wrote like 5 articles that month. So I'm like, I know this looks bad on me. Of course, I told Oswald and stuff, hey, I'm going on vacation. But at the time, I'm like, hey, if he's going to let me go, like there's a pretty strong case now coming off this really shitty month. So that happened. He called, and as soon as I saw his name on my phone, I knew what was up. So I went in, kind of obviously not happy about it, but he just told me, we're making some changes, we're going to have to let you go, whatever. And then that's when I said, you got any names, got any leads? So when I hit up Brian Tucker, he immediately responded like, hey, yeah, just apply here. Like these are the 2 positions we're hiring for. I actually reached out to Chuck Mindenhall as well. I forgot to mention this, but I wrote for Fight Magazine as well at the time with Bleacher Report, and did a road trip article for them and did a couple other feature interviews for Fight Magazine. But the way I got the Fight Magazine gig was one day I was in Barnes & Noble, picked up Fight Magazine, and saw Chuck Mindenhall did this amazing Ben Askren feature. So I immediately hit up Chuck Mindenhall because I met him at events. He's an East Coast guy as well from Connecticut. So I met him in Atlantic City and Newark, New Jersey. So I had his number and I hit him up. I'm like, man, like excellent work on this Askren piece. This is the kind of work that I would love to do. Is there any way that you could just connect me with Fight Magazine? And immediately he shot me the editor. The editor's like, hey man, if Chuck thinks you're good enough, then I think you're good enough. Like we'll give you a try. One of those deals. So when I knew I was talking to Tucker and MMA fighting, I hit Chuck up again. So thank you, Chuck Mindenhall. 2 jobs you've gotten me in your life. Probably won't be the last. And I was like, hey man, I'm talking to fighting. If you could put in a good word for me, that'd mean everything. And Tucker was like, Chuck vouched for you. So if Chuck vouched for you, then I'm sure you're good enough. Like we'll try it out. So that was kind of it.
You notice a common theme here in what Hunter's saying, and it's that the second you wanted something, you went and figured out how to get it, whether it's getting contacts and things like that. There are people in this industry who wait around and expect things to happen, and in a lot of cases, you have to sort of see what's available, have to put some feelers out there. And if anyone can take anything away from what Hunter said so far, it is that you got to hustle and you got to see what the next step is. And I think a lot of people can learn from this, because I think there is an attitude with certain people in this industry that just expect things to come their way, and you have to sort of put that extra little bit of effort out there to sort of promote yourself. So I'm glad to hear that that's sort of what you did to get these positions. Now, as far as being at fighting, what was the day-to-day like there? Because I know from what I hear, it's a bit of a grind, but I mean, you're a guy that embraces that grind on a regular basis. Yeah,
man, it was exactly what you said, a grind, man. I had freedom to pretty much do things I wanted to do. Just had to run it by Tucker first. If I wanted to interview somebody, or I wanted to do, whatever, just had to run it by him first. But otherwise, there was just kind of running threads where people would toss ideas or say, hey, we saw this floating out there. Does somebody want to write it up? Because this was when they were first like making that really strong like social media fun kind of push, where they would like show Instagram videos from a fighter, or like do articles of just like a quick like Sage Northcutt bending a frying pan in half, like that kind of stuff. So like if you saw something like that floating on social media, but you couldn't write it at the time, you just throw it in the thread like, hey, this is out there, somebody wants to snag it. But otherwise, it would be cool, man. It'd be like Ariel or one of those guys would get a lead that maybe they couldn't write up again, and just kind of toss it in there like, hey, this is out there, just source me, do whatever, So it was cool in that respect, but also a big part of it is the MMA hour, which I feel like all MMA, anybody who follows MMA journalism knows how MMA fighting uses the MMA hour, right? Like Ariel will do hours worth of interviews on Monday, and then throughout the week, they'll trickle out articles based on things that fighters said during those interviews. Super smart, man. Like that's repurposing content to a T. It's beautiful the way they do it. But the way that works is ahead of time, fighters will sign up for shifts and basically say, you know, I'll take whatever Cody Garbrandt says on the MMA Hour, I'll turn it into 3-4 articles, whatever, something like that. So it's cool, man. Like, I really like the system they have. It's obviously worked out well for them. You know, they're at the top of the heap for a reason. So that was it, man. The day-to-day was just, like you said, a grind. You know, you're always on the watch looking for something, working on your own as well. You know, the few connections I had at the time, I was very on top of them, you know, getting the Adam Milstead interviews, the Cody Garbrandt interviews, Kevin Lee interviews, the ones that I could get, they were excited about.
Yeah, no, that's definitely for sure. Now, were you getting to do as much writing as you like? Because a lot of that is, you know, like you said, just repurposing content from the MMA Hour. But were you still finding, you know, sort of a space for yourself to do some writing? Because I remember you writing a few things, but I don't, you know, I don't remember if it was sort of to your liking as far as how much writing you could do personally, you know, with interviews yourself.
Oh yeah, man. Like there were no limits on that as far as that's concerned. I was definitely doing as much as I wanted to. And also, I think I was still writing for Fight Magazine as well while it was still alive during the same time. So they were cool with that, which is awesome. And Fight Magazine, man, like those are the articles that I wish we could get online somehow or get like that. I think those are some of the best things I've ever written. And I feel like 3 people maybe have read them, but they're out there. Like they exist. But okay. Yeah, man, as far as no limits or anything like that, no.
Okay, that's good to hear. Now, as far as you know, you being at fighting, and then you know, FloSports comes around and they create FloCombat. How did this sort of come together with you? You know, leaving MMA fighting, because a lot of people would not leave that position, you know, at fighting and you know, take something else. So, what was it about the FloSports gig that enticed you to, you know, join their marketing team?
Yeah, it was money. You know, straight up, it was money. I was actually writing for FloCombat towards the end. FloCombat launched in April 2016, and I started officially full-time with FloCombat in the marketing role in July 2016. So from April to July, I was just freelancing for FloCombat while still writing for MMA fighting, which is crazy in retrospect that MMA fighting was cool with that and both sides were cool with that. But I was doing for FloCombat things that I couldn't do for MMA fighting. So fighting took priority. And then if I just had something that they were like, oh, we can't really use that, I would take it to Flo. So that was how it worked at the time. But then in July, they created that content marketing coordinator position that I have now. And just the offer, man. I mean, you know how it is in MMA, full-time salary positions with benefits, they don't exist. So like when one comes up, yeah, I had to sacrifice a lot of the writing and the things that I like to do for it, but the offer was too good and those options are still there. So I just pounced on it.
Now, when you were at fighting and you mentioned, you know, having that other marketing job on the side, like, were you just a full-time freelancer at the time, or did you have that other marketing job? Like, what was like, or was the FloCombat gig the first like official full-time thing you had? Yeah,
FloCombat was the first official full-time salary deal that I had. I freelanced my entire life during college and after college up until July 2016. I was just freelancing. So throughout all of it, from the beginning, Idea House was there. Like that side marketing was always there up to FloCombat. So yeah,
okay.
I was constantly on that side hustle with that.
Was there anyone you sort of talked to at the time about making this decision? Because, you know, money's great, but were you ever sort of worried, you know, would this sort of impact my career, making it wasn't even a lateral move. It was more of just like, you know, trying something different, but also, you know, you get to do a bit of writing with Flo as well.
Yeah, man, it was. And of course I discussed it with my family, my girlfriend, everybody, just making sure they were all really excited about it, because I'm sure a parent's like primary concern when a kid is just freelancing, making a couple $100 every month, you know, where is this going? Like, is this ever going to be a career? So then you see something that really looks like a career, they're all for it, you know? And my girlfriend probably had to deal with it the most because, yeah, I did have to sacrifice a lot of the things that I like writing all the time. You know, I love to write, and obviously I knew that would be getting scaled back. But what saved it all, again, is FloSports' structure, A, and B, Dwayne's direction as the editor of FloCombat. Having that relationship with Dwayne has made all the difference, because I'm still free to do whatever I want. You know, if I want to write a feature story, I'll just write the feature story. There's literally nobody who's going to tell me not to do that, as long as I still get everything else done and take care of my work on all the fronts. There's no limit to what I can do. So that was very appealing. That was a very appealing dynamic with FloCombat.
What does your day-to-day look like as far as your position with, you know, the marketing stuff, and then also your writing? Like, I know it kind of differs. I have a general sense of what it is, because literally I'm pretty sure you and I talk almost every day, just whether it's, you know, with content on the site or whatever. But for those at home, you know, what's sort of your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, yeah, like you said, man, it involves a lot of talking to you and Dwayne.
Yeah.
A lot of coordination on that front. You know, we have different documents in place where I can track everything, but it's making sure articles get up on the site, making sure they get promoted properly through all of our social properties. I do the email newsletters. I set up ad campaigns for them. So the biggest thing about FloCombat that I think people mostly know this now, or have realized this now, I should say, is that we live stream our own events. You know, that's pretty unique to an MMA site. And a big part of my job is making sure that those events get promoted, that they run smoothly, that all the content's there for them, et cetera, et cetera. So I make ads for those events a lot. I try to think of fun ways to kind of shine light on these not so known names. You know, when you're dealing with people that not a lot of people know, you have to explore other avenues. Like, oh, this guy fought, you know, a UFC veteran in when he was an amateur. You know, that's fun. Like, maybe you should check this guy out. So you start reaching, or like, this guy has 6 straight knockouts. Like, yeah, maybe you don't know his name, but he's probably going to knock this guy out. So that's fun. So doing a lot of research on regional fighters on that level is a part of the day-to-day. But man, super social media heavy. As you know, I'm tweeting, Facebooking, Instagram all the time with FloCombat. Graphics, all those quote templates, or like the quick hitter videos, things like that. You know, I'm making all those assets. So that's a big part of it too. And that was something that I had to totally learn for Flo. You know, I had very, very minimal Photoshop and video editing knowledge, as you know, because you've helped me with a lot of the video editing too. So I jumped in, I was like, what does the play button do? I don't understand, you know? So shout out to you on that, man. You had to sit through a lot of the growing pains on that.
No, it was good. You were a quick learner. Actually, Dwayne was too. It's, you know, and again, I went to school for editing, so it's kind of something that I've always had in my back pocket, and it's been, you know, very easy for me to do a lot of the content I produce because I know how to edit. But it's a good skill to have, as I'm sure you know. Now, as far as you know, you talked about, you know, doing the social media, doing the graphics. What is your role with the other Flo sites, like, you know, Flo Grappling, you know, all the Flo Wrestling? Like, are you, because you're a FloSports marketing coordinator, is your hand in those entities as well, or is it just FloCombat?
It is actually just FloCombat. You know, I think my official title is with FloCombat, not FloSports. Even though FloSports owns Flo Grappling, Flo Wrestling, FloCombat owns all of them, the roles are very defined within each vertical. They call them verticals. So, well, I stick to FloCombat solely. You know, I will work with Flo Grappling or Flo Wrestling guys. For instance, when Ben Askren's fighting on FloCombat for one championship, obviously I'm going to talk to the wrestling guys like, hey, can you help us, you know, promote this, whatever. And vice versa. You know, if an MMA guy is doing a grappling tournament like Submission Underground, you know, on Flo Grappling, they get a ton of MMA guys on those shows. And Chael, obviously, the promoter and owner of Suggs. So there is cross promotion. But as far as me directly having a hand in their day-to-day, that doesn't happen at all.
Well, with the fact that this is, you know, this is the MMA industry podcast, we talk all about stuff going on in MMA, but this is on Fightful, and Fightful, you know, we cover pro wrestling as well. So I have to ask, and I know you don't have a ton of involvement in that, but FloSlam obviously didn't work out with the site. You know, what was sort of your relationship with them, and did you know much about what was happening over there? Because as far as my work with FloCombat, I didn't know anything about that. It was just FloCombat only.
Right, man. Yeah, that was a crazy situation and really unfortunate. And as far as I knew them, you know, their content marketing coordinator, basically who did what I do for FloCombat for FloSlam, his name was Austin. And I actually, like, he shadowed me because he came on after me. So when he first got hired, I kind of helped onboard him to teach him the stuff. So I liked Austin a lot, and he was really good at what he did too, which makes it further unfortunate now. But yeah, I mean, he would be in the marketing meetings every week. You know, we meet every Monday just to discuss strategies and things like that. But he would be there, and I would literally see him, but I talked to him maybe once a month. Okay. And above him, I think, you know, Brent Brookhouse was the senior editor for those guys, and I literally don't think I talked to him once when he was at FloSlam. So it's crazy because everybody thinks like maybe we know the ins and outs of every other vertical. That's just not the case. And which further complicates it is that I work remotely from Pittsburgh, and they're all in Austin, Texas. So I don't see them every day. There's no mingling. You know, we stay in our lanes and keep our eyes on our own duties and keep our head down on that and focus on that. So with FloSlam, man, I can legitimately say I have no idea what went down there.
When you're having meetings, because I know you have them, I don't know how often you have them. Do you have them daily, or how often do you have sort of like the team meetings as far as, you know, what's going on and everything? Is that daily or weekly? How does that work?
Yeah, they're weekly. Yeah, we have weekly team meetings, and then we have one-on-one meetings. So me with like my direct boss, we have a meeting every week. So there's two weekly meetings, and then there's a FloCombat weekly meeting. So like people on Team FloCombat, so to speak, will meet once a week. So that's 3 weekly meetings altogether. And that, it's honestly enough, man. Like, it's crazy the way the remote work life has been facilitated by like Google Hangouts. Like right now, you can just do stuff like this, and it's been incredible. But it also helped because Idea House, when I worked for Idea House, that was a remote job as well. The owner actually lived in California the whole time. So I would meet with him, you know, pretty much every day. We would Skype back then because he was constantly helping me out, teaching me. You know, I was fresh out of college student, went from an intern to like kind of a full-time gig with them, but it was always freelance. And so I kind of understood the way to work from home from the jump, which is very important. Maybe as you're learning now, man, you're transitioning to that work from home life. So that's fun. It's different, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it very much is. And you have to really, I just always have this mentality, like I have to make sure I'm doing more than enough just in case something like, you know, cause there's no like when I worked a 9 to 5, and I had full-time and benefits and all that stuff, you know, if I was sick or something, it didn't matter. Cause you know, that was covered. I had days to cover that. But now it's like, if I don't work, I don't eat. Right. So you gotta, you know, you gotta kind of keep that in mind as well too. So it is a lot different. One more thing sort of on the meetings and stuff. So, you know, Willie Saylor, that's, I imagine that, you know, cause he is the head of content for, is it FloSports? What's his role as far as, cause I know we talk to him a lot as far as the stuff at Combat. Right.
Yeah. There are just kind of divisions, so to speak, between the verticals. So the managing editors will just oversee a couple verticals. I want to say like 4 or 5, could be more than that. I'm really not sure. But there's Dwayne, and then above Dwayne would be the managing editor. Gotcha. And those managing editors just kind of make sure everything's going smoothly, that the content's good on every site, and coordinate the meetings just to get everybody together and discuss. So they're like just that next level of defense and oversight.
Good stuff. What's in store next year for FloCombat? I mean, you know, I've heard rumblings of, you know, potentially another road trip. You know, have you been told anything as far as, because genuinely I am curious too, because, you know, I talk to you guys a lot, but I obviously want to, you know, I think our audience too would like to know what's in store for next year, because we're coming to the close of 2017.
Yeah, we are, man. 2017 has been amazing, and 2018 is just going to build on it. You know, I feel like you look at 2016 to 17, there's a massive jump there, just what we've accomplished and the things that we've rolled out, the different plans. But I'll drop you some nuggets, Lynch, since I love you. You know, I'll spill the beans a little bit, so to speak. But Dwayne and I are going to be starting a little daily type show, daily morning show. You know, we toyed with that idea a bit in 2017 with the morning update, but we never got in a full groove with it. But we're gonna have something real slick, branded, and nice rolling out for that. So we're gonna take the lead on a little more video content. We're not pivoting to video fully. You know, we're not pulling a Fox Sports on you.
You're not jumping off the cliff yet.
Yeah, don't worry about that. But we are gonna make an effort to do some more of that stuff. And like you said, the road trip, man. We're always one wild hair up our ass away from going on another road trip. And the way we see it right now, Canada. We haven't been to Canada yet, so maybe that'll be the next one. Maybe we'll revisit somewhere we've already been and try to do a more in-depth kind of deal. Because, man, the road trips, as much as I love them, the thing that when I look back I wish we could do more was just dig in more at each location. You know, we're there for a day, and it's just flat out not enough time to really do what we want to do at each stop. And even though we can get 6, 7, 8 interviews, I am personally interested to know what one interview would look like if you just did a road trip Albuquerque, you know, and it was 5 days in Albuquerque. Like, what would that piece of content look like? So I feel like that's something that we could absolutely crush, would be really fun, that I would love to do. So that might happen. But yeah, man, the road trips are always there. We might even do another weight cut challenge or something silly like that, because we like to have fun. So that was crazy, and everybody loved that. So, you know, we'll keep our eyes open to fun stuff too. We're not afraid to humiliate ourselves, man. As you know, fighting Cub Swanson and Hannah Scoggins, I'm not afraid to look silly on camera. So we'll get into some wacky stuff, I'm sure.
And that's the stuff I love about working for Flo and, being part of the team is we're, very outside the box because, there is a need in MMA for your MMA junkies, your MMA fighting to do the hard news, the standard interviews and stuff like that. So it kind of gives, Flo a little bit of space to do some outside the box stuff. And I'll never forget that video you did with the referee, the wrestling, the wrestling referee, where you tried to imitate him going across the floor. Like stuff like that is awesome that you'd never see on like an MMA junkie,
Right, man. And like you said, there is definitely a need for MMA fighting, MMA junkie and sites like that. Yeah. But something we realized early on, and it helped me working for MMA fighting, Dwayne working for MMA junkie briefly. We knew right off the bat we would never beat them at what they do. You're not going to come in as a new kid on the block and do that better than they already do it. You don't have the resources, you don't have the manpower, and you don't have the experience to pull it off. So we were like, we're not even going to try to do that. Like, let's just carve our own lane, do what we do. Dwayne and I are kind of different out there, trippy kind of dudes anyway, as they'll say. And we like to have fun, man. We like to drink beer and have fun. So we're like, why don't we just bring that to MMA media? As far as we can see, nobody is being that real right now. So we're just cutting all the fat away and saying, let's do it the way we know how to do it. And people have really responded well to it.
One thing I really think is cool about the way you guys kind of cover things is, you'll see fighters like reach out. Like I saw the other day, Dwayne posted something, I think it was with Savage or something like that. And, like Calvin Gaslam's like commenting, like that stuff you don't see with other journalists. And, people might think that's crossing lines, but the way you do that and you keep it sort of in your lane is, you do the reporting, you kind of keep it there, but you develop sort of you kind of get to know them on a personal level. And that's where they see you as both a journalist and, a friend to a certain degree, but that's where you usually get the best content. And I think that's so cool. Like there's so many times where, Dwayne will post something on Instagram and you'll post something and you'll see like a fighter chime in. And that's when, like you've kind of got them on that level. And I think that's very cool and a very neat way of sort of reporting, in my opinion anyways.
Yeah, man. And that's kind of what I alluded to earlier on that first road trip when I said Dwayne kind of showed me a different way to do things. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that I'm coming straight out of college. Well, I was actually still in college, about to graduate at the time, with a traditional print journalism degree coming, and everything he was doing was not by the book. He was breaking literally all the rules of journalism. Like, dude, you just had a beer with Jim Miller and like called him a fuckhead or something. Like,
yeah.
You just did that? Like, are you kidding me? But the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, dude, like Jim loves it. Like, this is how relationships work. Like, this is how normal people act. So he breaks down the walls of traditional journalism when he creates these relationships, and it makes more meaningful stories when it comes time. I always try to put it like this: like if somebody were to write a biography on my dad, I would want it to be me. I'm probably the most biased person ever about my dad, but I guarantee you I will capture who he was better than somebody hired to come in, study him for 2-3 months, and then write a book about it. You're never going to know what I know about him, period. So and Dwayne, obviously it's not to that extent. He's not living with these guys and things, but the way he's breaking it down and seeing their true selves, I feel like that's why his stories hit on a more emotional and meaningful level, is because he's seeing that real side of them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. What has been sort of your biggest accomplishment so far in your career, whether it was an interview, whether it was, maybe getting hired at fighting or getting hired at Flo? Like, is there one thing that sort of stands out for you?
Man, honestly, it's the most cliche shit ever, and now I sound like a fighter, like giving these PR answers. But I feel like the best is still to come. Every year I try to challenge myself and do something better than I did last year. But the very first road trip with Dwayne, again, it seems like every story leads back to that road trip. But the story I did for Fight Magazine, coming out of that, I feel like was the first time that I came out of my shell kind of as a writer and found my groove in that way, writing in that style and those kind of themes. Getting the Cody Garbrandt, like I feel like my success is partly owed to Cody Garbrandt, like the rise of Cody Garbrandt, because I was talking to him, before he was in the UFC. I interviewed him several times, and he was always, man, like anytime you need something, just text me, hit me up. And he would always answer my texts and interviews and everything. So his whole rise up to the title, I felt like I was right there every way. And the Maddox Maple story, that was a huge one. That's one that I would definitely say super proud of. Somebody in his camp, man, I don't even remember who it was, but somebody like tipped me off to the fact that Cody was working with that Maddox Maple and like being a part of this kid's life. And I wrote that story for, it was either MMA Fighting or Fight Magazine or both. I know I did something for Fight Magazine on them, but I can't remember if it was before or after Cody's debut in the UFC. But either way, like that whole Cody Garbrandt Maddox Maple story was instrumental, I think, for me coming up, for people kind of noticing who I was. And to that end, I still don't think people really know who I am. Like, I'm not trying to say it like that. Like, there's still that climb, you know, you still want to get out there, get your face out there and do more. So
we got about 15 minutes left on this show, and I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions if anybody has any. I don't think we've got any yet, but I just put out the distress signal so people can get on there. People are asking about net neutrality, you know, the whole thing that's going on in the States with that. Are you familiar with that at all? I mean, we should probably talk a little bit about it.
Oh, man, I wish I was familiar at all with it. This is, man, when I get out of my league in conversations, I literally just withdraw myself. Like, I'll never be that guy trying to talk about something I don't understand, because that just creates more confusion and chaos because you're giving away hashtag fake news and stuff. So I don't know enough about that to talk about it. I got nothing on that, man. I'm sorry.
What would be sort of the best advice you could give someone that's looking to get into the industry, you know, whether they're just, you know, in college, or maybe they're, you know, someone that's sick of their 9-to-5 and they want to, you know, start writing about MMA? What would be sort of your best advice?
Definitely just write your balls off, or interview your balls off. You know, if you want to do things like Lynch does, the video interview, I mean, you've set the standard for that time and again. It's like, I feel like you were always the guy doing that, and now you're like that guy times 10. Like, you took something you were already the best at and then got better at it, and it was like, damn, this guy, like nobody's catching you with that. But like, you know, like you said earlier, man, the repetitions. Like, if you don't have repetitions, I mean, you may be naturally talented. You may be like, you write 5 articles a month and they're 5 great articles. But until you start doing an article every day or something to that level, you won't get the attention of the sites that will be looking to hire people. You know, volume's very important. And then, you know, once you carve out your spot, you can pull it back and focus on the things that really matter to you. And once you've established that for yourself, but repetitions, man, volume, reaching out, man, like you said about networking, like, I can't emphasize that enough. I was glad that you specifically highlighted that, because I didn't realize that all of my stories were going that way. But when you said, I'm like, yeah, he's right. Like, that's really all it was that every time I got an opportunity, I wasn't like, hey, yeah, I did it. I was like, okay, now how can I use this as the next step, next step, next step? So always be looking ahead and always be looking to network. If somebody says, hey, you know, we appreciate you reaching out, but we just don't have space, or we feel like you need to work on this, definitely don't just give up. You know, there's a million MMA websites out there right now. I'm sure somebody will find something you can do for them, and take that opportunity and then grow with it, man. Like, definitely get out there, try. The biggest thing that I always think is funny is when people are like, oh, I just, you know, I can't find my space in MMA. And I'm like, well, who all have you talked to? And they're like, I've tried this one guy, but that was it. You know, he said I wasn't good enough or whatever. And then I just kind of figured I must need to work more or something. It's like, no, just try. Like, have you actually tried? So that's step 1, try.
Yeah. And I think one thing that people need to do, I mean, I think, you know, there's certainly a place for if you want to give your UFC picks or your predictions and stuff, but that market is so saturated. Like, you always have to remember, like, why would someone want to hear your opinion on fights as opposed to, you know, Luke Thomas or someone who's like, you know, established, or people, you know, have known really well. So I think, you know, people make that mistake too, where they'll just focus primarily on UFC content when there's so many other aspects of MMA that need to be covered. And yeah, you're not going to get the clicks that you would if you were, you know, getting a big name interview, but it still needs to be covered. And those are the things where it comes back, you know, later on, where, you know, let's say you do interview someone on the come up, they might end up going to the UFC and they'll remember you.
Exactly, man. That is so true. You know, never think that you're above anything. You know, you're not above any work. Even now, none of us are above any work. You know, every fighter's story matters, in my opinion, and they all deserve to be told equally. You know, they're sacrificing everything. And a lot of times the regional fighters are sacrificing more. You know, when you get to the UFC, the pay is better, the sponsorship opportunities are better, gyms are nicer, etc. So it's not that they don't grind just as hard once they're there, because they absolutely do. But the fact remains that being a regional fighter is almost more of a risk, you know, more honorable in a sense. But yeah, man, that's super important. You know, just go out, do it, man. Don't do what everybody else is doing, and also don't consider yourself a specialist right off the bat. Don't say, oh, I'm great at post-fight breakdowns or whatever, and then just do post-fight breakdowns. Like, no, spread your wings a little, find out what you're actually good at. And man, like I feel like the FloCombat gig is a perfect example of that, because I don't get that job if I can't write news, write features, interview fighters, do social media, do marketing, if I don't have that whole toolkit, I don't get that job, period. So if I went in saying, oh, I'm a features writer, they would have been like, well, we don't need a features writer. Like, we need this guy who can do a little bit of everything. And I feel like that is where the landscape has shifted now, is where you need to be valuable in more than just one way.
We're going to go to the chat here. Our good friend, Ed, I don't want to butcher your last name, but you know what I'm talking about. Ed, who always tweets us at FloCombat. He asks, when do you think you'll do the morning show in 2018? He wants to know a little bit more, I guess.
Very soon in 2018, Ed, whose last name shall remain anonymous, but what's up, Ed?
No, but it's Carbajal. You know who I'm talking about, right? On Twitter.
Oh, that's honestly not the one that I thought it was. I thought you were talking about a different Ed. So
okay, no, yeah, my apologies, Ed. I just didn't want to butcher it, and I probably did there, but that's okay. You answered this question.
Carbajal is the best, dude. I love that guy. We met him actually through a FloCombat Fan Fest in New York City, so that was cool. It was actually the first one we did for UFC 205, so that was funny. Ed's the man. The morning show is going to start very early 2018, so not like January 1st early, but definitely the first quarter of 2018 we'll get it rolling.
And if you guys need to fill in for that show, I know someone who lives in Toronto and has a lot of free time. Anyways, we got a question here from Big Baller Brand. He says, how do you guys feel about bigger websites not giving smaller site writers credit when they break stories? I mean, this is something that's been going on for a while. I do notice it's getting a little bit better, but I do take issue with it only because it literally takes a quick Twitter search to find out if news has been reported and to say, oh, I don't follow this person. I always check Twitter first. If I have news or I see a story breaking, that's usually my go-to. Some stuff does get missed, but I feel that is important because that's how, people end up breaking news and they get a reputation. Like our friend, MMA Kings, Nolan King, he's done a great job of breaking news, and I feel like now he's starting to get the recognition. What's sort of your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, man. Nolan's the perfect example there. It's one of my least favorite things about MMA media is when that happens. I feel like there's no place for that, man. Like you said, it takes one search to figure it out, and a lot of times things get missed. The worst is when they get missed, they get called out, and they still don't edit their story. This isn't printed in newspaper anymore. You don't have to wait till the next day to offer your change. Log into the site, go in the CMS, and add the link. That's literally all you have to do is add the link. But I feel like a lot of time egos get in the way, or they'll split hairs and be like, oh, well, I did it independently. It's like, oh, that's cool. I just invented a light bulb in my backyard on my own with my own resources, but you're not going to say I invented the light bulb, right? I don't care that you got it on your own. Somebody beat you to it, and I'll give them credit for it. So that's how I feel about it, man. I feel very strongly about it, as you can probably tell, because the print journalism background, first of all, hammers that home. But second of all, I just think it's disrespectful, and it highlights exactly what you said. They're going to say, well, what am I supposed to do? Credit every small site that says anything on Twitter? Yes, that's how sites become not small anymore. If you never acknowledge them, then they're never going to get off the ground. So, yeah, do it.
Joy Tremendous in the chat says MMA Kings constantly gets jacked on his breaks, and then they don't give him credit after they get called out. Well, actually, he got credited today. I don't know if you saw this, Hunter, but Lyoto Machida is going to be fighting Eric Anders, and MMA Kings actually got a nice little credit there on MMA fighting. So that's good to see. That's what I mean by I think things are changing a little bit. I know, especially for Nolan, he's done such a good job lately with breaking fights over the last year and a bit that I think people are just forced to, you can't hide any longer. This is a guy who's been, breaking a lot of different stories. So it's a tough gig. I mean, if it's not easy to get, a couple, to have sources that'll trust you. It's not easy to, be 100% accurate on things. So, I commend those who are putting their neck out there and trying to break news and everything like that. So that's certainly important. As we wait for some more questions to trickle in, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making in our industry, whether it's, how they conduct themselves on social media or maybe the way they're going about, covering the sport? What are some things that sort of stand out to you?
The biggest thing to me is just negativity in general. I don't like when people are just trashing UFC cards or trashing fighters when they're down or trashing this and that. It's funny and it gets a lot of retweets and all that. It gets a lot of engagement when people do that. Oh, this is literally the worst UFC card I've ever seen in my life, and it's funny. Some people have made it their gimmick, so to speak, and it works for them. But the negativity, I just feel like doesn't have a place, or getting hypersensitive about being biased towards fighters, like cheering for fighters. There's nothing wrong with that to me. I feel like most of us got into this as fans. I started as a fan. I'm never not going to be a fan of this in all likelihood. It would take something really drastic for me to be like, oh, I'm done with MMA completely. I'm still a fan. I'm going to cheer for dudes. I'm going to root for dudes. and I'm going to, you know, say, wow, that was awesome. You know, great job. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I feel like the negativity and or the feeling that you can never show your true self out there because then you break the mold of being objective, so to speak, which objectivity to me is bullshit anyway. It doesn't really exist. So yeah, that's my feelings on the matter. But yeah, man, the negativity is the biggest thing. I can't stand the people on Twitter who are just constantly hating or doing this and that, being, you know, stop talking to this bully and things like that. It's like, dude, come on.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And, you know, oftentimes if you look at that person's account, they're tweeting several people throughout the day, you know, just talking, complaining, you know, talking about just, you know, things that they're not happy with. And I mean, that's someone who clearly has got their own issues and they're projecting onto others. And that's something you always have to remember. I have people that I have to mute all the time. I get it a lot. I mean, like, you know, I get a lot of good feedback, but then I get the idiots who say, you know, they're nitpicking or they're saying this and that, and you just have to ignore it. I think that's the biggest thing. Sometimes I'll feed the troll just because, you know, you want a little bit of entertainment, but I tend to try and avoid it as much as I can because you're just going down that really unfortunate wormhole. I did want to get to another question here. Kyle Volkman, who, by the way, you can follow on Twitter at VolkStyles. He's been doing a great job with the UFC Fight Pass stuff, just kind of letting people know what's coming up. And he asks, what's the most challenging part as MMA media in reaching out to fighters and setting up interviews? I'll let you answer this first, and then I'll give you my take.
I think literally knowing how to reach out to the fighter is the hardest part from my perspective. You know, like if you're starting from the ground up, you have to kind of know the framework. A lot of times you have to go through their managers, and understanding how to balance those relationships can be very tricky. You know, if you text a fighter, say you get the fighter's phone number from his manager, you do a great interview with him, you hear something else down the line and you text that fighter or you call that fighter, that could get you blackballed by the manager right there. He could say, you know, I don't like you going around me to get to my fighter or something like that. So there are a lot of tricky dynamics where that's concerned. I feel like just getting in, though, and being trusted is probably the hardest part. You know, proving to the managers, hey, when I talk to your guy, the article isn't, you know, it's not going to be a horrible article talking about what a shitty guy this is. Like, you can trust me with this. So building that trust and building those relationships, but then managing those relationships, it's the hardest part. And also, for new people especially, because you got to keep in mind, you're now playing catch up with guys who have been in this game for 10 years. You know, guys like Ariel who have been talking to these managers forever, has them at the drop of a hat, you know, and has the platform that is appealing to them. So if Ariel says, hey, I want your guy on MMA Hour, of course the manager wants his fighter on the MMA Hour. It's going to be seen by millions of people. So it's tough, man. You're constantly playing catch up.
One thing I kind of wanted to add on this is I think there's got to be a bit of realism here. I see, you know, guys starting out that are, you know, tweeting Daniel Cormier or Max Holloway trying to set up an interview. Like, first off, don't ever tweet a fighter in public. It looks super unprofessional, in my opinion, to set up an interview that just doesn't look good. Ask someone, I always tell people this, ask someone that's interviewed that fighter before and see how they got them. If there's a manager, always go through the manager first. Managers can be a pain in the ass. I sent you that screenshot last week of that manager that expected me to do an interview at the drop of a hat, and this fighter wasn't even anything special. But you know, you do get stuff like that. But in general, yeah, go through the manager and you know, build those relationships and build those contacts. You know, a lot of times, Hunter, and I'm sure you have the same thing, I get interviews given to me just because I have that relationship and people know I'm not going to try and, you know, make a clickbait article or try and make the fighter look bad. So there has to be that trust built, but be realistic. You know, I say this all the time. You know, there's a lot of prelim fighters in the UFC that don't do enough interviews, and you know, they need to be, you know, they're not doing media day at, you know, this weekend at UFC Winnipeg. So hit those guys up, find out who their managers are. If you don't, you know, maybe go like a private route, you know, whether it's, you know, send a private message on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, but don't make it in public. And you know, those are just some like simple rules that I kind of you know, see people making you know, on sort of a regular basis. We've hit 2 o'clock here, but we started a bit late, so we'll kind of carry this a little bit longer. I'm just going to check the chat, see if we got anyone else saying anything here. Does it bother you? Okay, here we go. Here's one here from Keyboard Warriors MMA. It says, does it bother you guys that writers like that guy in Detroit who crapped all over the 218 card is allowed a media seat above a real MMA writer? I mean, here's the rule with the UFC, and I'm sure you know this too, Hunter, is that if you're a big outlet, if you're a newspaper outlet, you'll automatically get accredited to a UFC event, because the way the UFC looks at that is they think that, you know, this is someone who is a, you know, it's coming from like a legit outlet. So if you have your own MMA website and you might do great work, they're still going to take the, you know, the legit, you know, Detroit Star or whatever. I don't even know what that was that guy got accredited to, but that's sort of how they operate. So that will always stay in place. That's just the way the UFC is. So yeah, does it bother me that he goes there and he craps on the card? I mean, I think he was, my issue with that guy was that I think he flat out gave misinformation, fake news, as you like to say, when he said that the Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje fight wasn't entertaining. I mean, come on, like, you know, you could be Stevie Wonder in the front row and you still know that fight was entertaining. Like, I just, you know.
Yeah,
so
the sound of the crowd alone let you know that fight was entertaining, man. That's exactly kind of what I talked about earlier with the constant negativity. The people like that who will constantly try to spin it in a negative way. I genuinely don't think that guy believes what he wrote. You know, I don't. Yep. And on that level, I have a problem with it because I don't agree with writing shit just to write it. You know, I don't think you should ever just write for clicks. So I think that's what he did, but why I ultimately don't have a huge problem with it was that it really highlighted how ridiculous he looked. You know, the community was on point and was tearing him up. You know, in that way, I feel like it's almost good that he wrote it because then it highlighted the problem, so to speak. You know, it kind of let everybody know, hey, this guy's a jackass. So I like that he kind of made his own bed in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, did he steal that seat from a writer who really deserved it, as the question states? You know, probably not really. I doubt anybody who was going to do a groundbreaking piece of news from that seat got passed over for that guy.
And by the way, I should point out too that you don't necessarily need credentials to get good content from a UFC event. I think there's a sort of a false narrative out there that you have to go to all these events to do it. I mean, a lot of my interviews I do from the comfort of my own home. I mean, it's just a matter of, and you know, I do Skype interviews, and you know, even if you're a writer, you can call the fighter and, you know, write something up. So you don't have to necessarily be at the event. Sure, you're not going to get, you know, the fresh reaction, but I'll give you a quick example, and I'll give him a quick shout out here. Nick Baldwin, who's you know, a friend of mine, a very young kid, 17 years old, you know, works for Bloody Elbow. Bloody Elbow is I'm not sure if most people know, does not get UFC credentials. There's a whole issue there. It's been going on for years. I won't get into that. Maybe I'll save that for when I get one of the Bloody Elbow guys on here at some point. But he got so many interviews this week already. And I mean, we're doing this on Thursday. The event, UFC on Fox 26, is on Saturday. Nick went to the Fighter Hotel and just, you know, found fighters and did interviews with them. That is how you get content. You don't need press credentials. Nick doesn't have press credentials, but he sat in the lobby and he was, you know, getting guys down. And, you know, of course he has relationships too, because he's, you know, worked with, you know, managers and fighters before, but that's how you get content. It's not by, you know, expecting that just because you're going to, and here's the thing too, if you get media credentials and you go to like a media day, Hunter, you know this, you only get an hour. You don't get to talk to everyone. It's tough. So you have to kind of pick and choose. So sometimes it's better to sort of take initiative and, you know, find other ways of getting content that isn't just the traditional going to an event and covering it. So trust me, going to events isn't the be all end all. It is important, but you can still get content otherwise. We got one more question here, and then I'll get you out of here, Hunter, because I know you got a lot of work to do. Our last question comes to us from Vince. You can follow him on Twitter at Deterrified. That's an interesting name. He says, how does MMA media find their sources for breaking news? I know from my end, usually it comes from, you know, managers or fighters themselves. And again, that just comes with years of developing relationships. I mean, I've had it where, you know, I knew a PR guy that, you know, had this, like, I remember, you know, breaking a story of a fighter signing with the UFC. And, you know, you got to be careful about this because you don't want to be wrong. So I had one source telling me that, you know, this fighter that had fought under him, it was signed to the UFC. And then I heard from one of his teammates that this was the case. So that's two sources. So then I was able to say, hey, this fighter signed with the UFC. So that's sort of an example of how you get sources. But I would imagine that's sort of the same way you've done it, Hunter, as far as, you know, getting sources. It's just, you know, knowing fighters and managers. You have to build that relationship.
Absolutely, man. That's the only way I know how to do it. But also, I guess an element to that we can't pretend doesn't exist is that a lot of times it'll just get spoon-fed to you. Maybe not us personally, but a lot of times it comes straight down the pipe from, you know, a manager just saying, hey, this is happening, you know, where there's really no work done by the journalist at all. And they're just like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks for telling me. You know, if your platform's big enough, maybe they see the value in that, like I kind of alluded to earlier. So that happens as well. There's a lot of spoon feeding. And, but as far as people actually going out, getting the breaking news, man, it's just like you said, it's all based on relationships. Do they trust you? Can you reach out to them and get a response? And then can you verify it with a second source within that camp or, you know, that fighter's personal life, however it may be. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes, man. There's no secret formula to it. There's no like breaking news forum where you just kind of pick up on tips. It's just all relationship based.
That's it for the show today. Hunter, I got to thank you, man. This was a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff I learned today. It's funny, you know, we talk all the time, but there's stuff that I didn't know about you that I got answered here, and I hope this was really informative for our audience. So it was great having you on the show, man. Just let people know anything you got coming up for FloCombat, for FloSports, anything at all that you want to plug. Take your time. Let people know where they can find you on social media, and anything else, man. The floor is yours.
No, absolutely, dude, and ditto to you, man. This was awesome. I see why fighters love talking to you. It's a supernatural conversation. That was perfect. But as far as following me, you know, I prefer you just follow FloCombat. So we're at FloCombat everywhere, FLO Combat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Go follow us there, and you'll see me on there anyway, so you can find my profiles through theirs. As far as things coming down the pipe, man, the thing that I feel like people sleep on all the time, we touched on a little, are our events. You know, it's not UFC caliber names, but it's UFC caliber fun, man. And I'll take that to my grave. You know, I feel like these fights they're crazy shit happens on these fights, like things that you won't see in the UFC, partly because the UFC fighters are more skilled and won't let this happen, and partly because it's super young, hungry fighters just going for broke, man. Like, the fights are genuinely fun. You know, I think you should definitely check out some FloCombat events if you haven't yet. Don't go in expecting UFC level skill levels, but just go in ready to be entertained. You know, look at it like entertaining. And then once in a while, we do, like Eric Anders was on FloCombat before he was in the UFC. So once in a while, there are those guys who come through and you're like, holy shit, this guy's on a different level. So it's fun if you're into that prospect watch scene as well, to kind of keep an eye on who's coming up. But yeah, man, that's FloCombat's always got the events. Like I said, in 2018, we're going to look to do that morning show. We're going to look to do something pretty fun with Dwayne's son, Savage Atticus. I'm sure if you guys follow Dwayne on Twitter or any social media, you've seen his son pop up here and there. But we got a fun series kind of planned for him. And we just posted his reactions to the FC Top 10. So our FC Top 10 is like the top 10 knockouts and submissions that happen on our event. So it's kind of like a highlight of the month. And we posted Savage's reactions to it, and it's hilarious. Like, just watching a 9-year-old kid react to these crazy finishes is really fun. But the series we have with him coming up is not that, something separate. So there's something fun with him coming down the pipe as well, man. So that's it. Go follow FloCombat and keep up on all of it.
And I got to quickly plug one of the events on Flow this weekend because I'm looking forward to it. KOP 59, which is in Michigan. Kevin Lee's brother, Keith Lee, bantamweight fighter, 2-1. He just made his pro debut this year. You got to check him out. He is, you know, Kevin Lee talked about it there in the media scrum at UFC 218. He is a couple fights away from what he believes is the UFC. Keith, a very talented guy, only 21 years old. So check that out. And also UFC veteran Terry Martin is going to be headlining the card. So I'm looking forward to that as well too. And everyone, you can always hit me up on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. That's LYNCH on Sports. I got a lot of content for UFC Winnipeg, including both headliners, Robbie Lawler and Rafael Dos Anjos. I talked to them months ago, right when this fight was announced. So you can look for that on Sportsnet. And then I got a bunch of content for Fightful. Geez, I always forget which outlets I work for. It's Fightful, Fansided, and FloCombat. They're all F's, so it's very easy to find all the content on there. So just check that out. And by all means, guys, if you like this show, I want to hear your feedback, ways we can improve it, ways we can make it better. This is still, you know, we're still a couple episodes in, so always looking to improve. And I got to thank Hunter once again. This was a lot of fun. And we'll see you next week, Thursday, 1 o'clock, hopefully. I'm trying to keep this as consistent as we can. But thanks, everyone, for watching. See you next time.